What is going on, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Happy Monday. I appreciate you being here. How are we doing today? How's everybody's Monday? What are you drinking? Everybody excited? Radio, see you. What's going on, fam? Ricardo, I hope you're doing well. Appreciate you joining us tonight. Saw Gucci in here a lot earlier. I hope you're doing well, Matt. What's up, JB? I hope you're doing well. How's it going? It's going, man. It was a Monday, but that's okay, because I remembered halfway through the day that I get to come and do all this with you tonight, and I started to get a little excited. I'm going to be transparent. I'm very tired. I'm very exhausted, like mentally. So I am going to, of course, do my best to read as I always do, and hope there's not a whole lot of errors. We're probably going to be going for about 2 hours. And I figured that I'm not sure how long these chapters are compared to the first book, so we're just going to read and see what we can get through tonight. I did label it about the same, so we'll see where we get to. But I am really excited to do this with you. I am excited for the new Mandalorian movie. I'm a huge Mandalorian fan. More so, like everybody, I think we're all like fans of Grogu. Oops. Hey Kev boy, what's up, Emmanuel? How are you? K-Drill, full cam Kev the Pokego. What's going on, K-Drill? I hope you're doing well, man. I got some mail today, and I did receive that Deoxys, so I have that to bust out on Thursday. It's all wrapped up still, but I made sure it was in there. So yeah, package received. This is the way. Here we are. The Marvelous Land of Oz by Frank L. Baum. Yeah, I'm excited to open it up. Attending a Gen AI meeting in a few minutes. We'll have a stream soon. Have a great stream. Absolutely, Emmanuel, and you as well, man. I appreciate you popping in as always, and hope the meeting goes well. Yay! How's it going, Anna? It's good to see you. Thanks for popping in. Howdy, Kev, Big Huds. What's going on, JR, Jackson, Jade? I hope you're all doing well, fam. It's really good to see you. We're just getting started. I'm just saying our hellos, and instead of coffee tonight, I decided to treat myself to a monster coffee. So we're going to do that tonight and see if I can get that interview. Wasn't a huge fan of Star Wars until I seen all the seasons of The Mandalorian, says Ricardo. Absolutely. I think the first 3 movies, episode 4, 5, and 6, were always hard, especially when you're growing up. You don't really understand the concepts too well. It's super scary at times, and Yoda's a little annoying. But then as you grow older, you realize all those things they were saying in the movie outlines and depicts messages and things in life that apply so well. And even so much so, it's impacted me that I even bring the Star Wars mentality into my job and into my learnings and teaching. So yeah, it's really good to see you all. Hey, Leanne, good morning. It's good to see you. It's good to see you. We're just really getting started. Of course, we are giving ourselves that little 5 minutes for people to come on in. I don't want anybody to miss them. Got 7 people here so far. Oh man, Emmanuel, I'm so tired of meetings about AI. Is it becoming a bad thing? No news are yet. Not being my fave. Not that I really want it, but thanks for asking. The Zard. That's how it is now. That's the new normal, sadly. That's the new normal. It's becoming very apparent. give it about that 7-minute mark, and we will go ahead and start going. This is called The Marvelous Land of Oz, being an account of the further adventures of Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman, and also the strange experience of the highly magnified Wogglebug, Jack Pumpkinhead, an animated Sawhorse, and the Gump. The story being. Cool. This Gen AI tools talk to themselves about Gen AI. Oh, that's bad. That's bad. Alright. And then we all lose our jobs. That's the one part that I'm really hoping that, maybe they need people still involved. So I'm going to try not to think of that, because I thought the same thing, maybe. I always like to keep humans in the loop somehow. Everybody hear the music okay? Is it too low? A little late, but perfect timing. What's up, Stafford? I didn't even see you come in, man. It's good to see you, brother. And only a little late. That's why I like to give it a little breath for people to come in. But typically that breath lasts about 7 minutes, so we are going to go ahead and jump right on in to the story. And this is the next book in the Wizard of Oz series. We did read through the first one in the last 3 episodes. Instead of starting the next one, we decided to wait so that we could all start it together. The 3D community. Models from prompts. Yikes. Extra avocado! I hope you're doing well. It's good to see you. Throwing the avocados in the chat. Creative part. Creative models from. Okay, taking over interesting stuff instead of just the boring tab, right? Let's make it do the boring stuff that we don't want to do. That would be a good use of AI. Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining me tonight. I know that it is a little bit on the later side on the East Coast. And, of course, the ones on the other side of the world are all working right now. But we are going to jump right on in, and we're going to start with Chapter 1, which is Tip Manufactures a Pumpkinhead. I'm assuming that Tip is a person, and I'm going to do the one thing I didn't do. Normally I pre-read the chapters that I read before I read them to y'all, and I haven't done that yet. So we get to kind of read it together, and I'm looking forward to that. So with that, everybody, gather around, sit down, relax, put your feet up, and enjoy the story of the Marvelous Land of Oz. And I appreciate you all being here. Chapter 1. Tip manufactures a pumpkinhead. You as well, Manuel. It's good to see you, and I hope your meeting goes well. In the country of the Gillikins, which is at the north of the Land of Oz, lived a youth called Tip. There was more to his name than that, for old Mombi often declared that his whole name was Tipitarius, but no one was expected to say such a long word when Tip would do just as well. This boy remembered nothing of his parents, for he had been brought when quite young to be reared by the old woman known as Mombi, whose reputation, I am sorry to say, was none of the best, for the Gillikin people had reasons to suspect her of indulging in magical arts, and therefore hesitated to associate with her. Mombi was not exactly a witch, because the good witch who ruled that part of the Land of Oz had forbidden any other witch to exist in her dominions. So Tip's guardian, however much she might aspire to working magic, realized it was unlawful to be more than a sorceress, or at most a wizardess. Tip was made to carry wood from the forest, that the old woman might boil her pot. He also worked in the cornfields, hoeing and husking, and he fed the pigs and milked the four-horned cow. That was Mombi's special pride. But you must not suppose he worked all the time, for he felt that would be bad for him. When sent to the forest, Tip often climbed trees for bird eggs or amused himself chasing a fleet of white rabbits or fishing in the brooks with the bent pins. Then he would hastily gather his armful of wood and carry it home, and when he was supposed to be working in the cornfields, and all the tall stalks hid him from Mombi's view, Tip would often dig in the gopher holes, or if in the mood seized him, lie upon his back between the rows of corn and take a nap. So, by taking care not to exhaust his strength, he grew as strong and rugged as a boy may be. Mombi's curious magic often frightened her neighbors, and they treated her shyly, yet respectfully, because of her weird powers. But Tip frankly hated her, and no pains to hide his feelings. Indeed, he sometimes showed less respect for the old woman than he should have done, considering she was his guardian. There were pumpkins in Mombi's cornfields, lying golden red among the rows of green stalks, and these had been planted and carefully tended that the four-horned cow might eat them in the wintertime. But one day, after the corn had all been cut and stacked, and Tip was carrying the pumpkins to the stable, he took a notion to make a jack-lantern, and try to give the old woman a fright with it. So he selected a fine big pumpkin, with one with a lustrous orange-red color, and began carving it. With the point of his knife, he made 2 round eyes and 3-cornered nose, and a mouth shaped like a new moon. The face, when completed, could not have been considered strictly beautiful, but it wore a smile so big and broad that it was so jolly in expression that even Tip laughed as he looked admiringly at his work. The child had no playmates, so he did not know that boys often dig out the inside of a pumpkin jack, and in the space thus made, put a lighted candle to render the face more startling. But he conceived an idea of his own that promised to be quite as effective. He decided to manufacture the form of a man who would wear this pumpkin head, and to stand in the place where old Mombi would meet it face to face. And then, said Tip to himself, with a laugh, she'll squeal louder than the brown pig does when I pull her tail, and shiver with fright worse than I did last year when I had the ague. He had plenty of time to accomplish his task, for Mombi had gone to a village to buy groceries, she said, and it was a journey of at least 2 days. So he took his axe to the forest and selected some stout, straight saplings, which he cut down and trimmed off all their twigs and leaves. From these he would make the arms and legs and feet of his man. For the body he stripped a sheet of thick bark from around a big tree, and with much labor fashioned it into a cylinder of about the right size, pinning the edges together with wooden pegs. Then, whistling happily as he worked, he carefully jointed the limbs and fastened them to the body with pegs whittled into the shape with his knife. By the time this feat had been accomplished, it began to grow dark, and Tip remembered he must milk the cow and feed the pigs. So he picked up his wooden man and carried it back to the house with him. During the evening, by light of the fire in the kitchen, Tip carefully rounded all the edges of the joints and smoothed the rough places in a neat and workmanlike manner. Then he stood the figure up against the wall and admired it. It seemed remarkably tall, even for a full-grown man. But that was a good point in a small boy's eyes, and Tip did not object at all to the size of his creation. Next morning, when he looked at his work again, Tip saw that he had forgotten to give the dummy a neck, by means of which he might fasten the pumpkin head to the body. So he went again to the forest, which was not far away, and chopped from a tree several pieces of wood with which to complete his work. When he returned, he fastened a cross piece to the upper end of the body, making a hole through the center to hold upright the neck. The bit of wood which formed his neck was also sharpened at the upper end, and when all was ready, Tip put on the pumpkin head, pressing it well down onto the neck, and found that it fitted, very well. The head could be turned to one side or the other as he pleased, and the hinges of the arms and legs allowed him to place the dummy in any position he desired. "Now that," declared Tip proudly, "is really a fine man, and it ought to frighten several screeches out of the old Mombi. But it would be much more lifelike if it were properly dressed." To find clothing seemed no easy task, but Tip boldly ransacked the great chest in which Mombi kept all her keepsakes and treasures, and at the very bottom he discovered some purple trousers, and a red shirt, and a pink vest, which was dotted with white spots. These he carried away to his man and succeeded. Although the garments did not fit very well, in dressing the creature in the jaunty fashion, some knit stockings belonging to Mombi and a much-worn pair of his own shoes completed the man's apparel, and Tip was so delighted that he danced up and down and laughed aloud in boyish ecstasy. "I must give him a name," he cried. "So good a man as this must surely have a name, I believe." He added, after a moment's thought, "I will name the fellow Jack Pumpkinhead." Mike Mazza, it's good to see you, brother. It is story time. In fact, we're reading a story that very much makes me think of you. We are reading the book that inspired the return to Oz with Princess Mombi. Hi, I'm almost here. No worries at all, boo. It's good to see you. Dude, just a nice ag, like a fever sickness old way of saying it. Thank you, Alien. I really appreciate that. Ag. I thought it might have been some weird thing in Oz that was agu, but then I remembered that's probably beef. Thank you for that. Ag, fever, or sickness. You rock it. The end of chapter 1. Moving into chapter 2, which is the marvelous powder of life. Ooh. Powder of life. It's funny because these numbers aren't chaptered, so I'll have to remember. These chapters aren't numbered. Wow. So I'll have to remember. Might be a French way of pronouncing it. Maybe you say the O part. Yeah, that's true. Like agu. Mostly I've only read it. Yeah, that's true. Like the word wind and wind are spelled the same. That happens to me a lot too. Hey, EDF, how's it going, fam? It's good to see you. I hope you had a good Monday. We're just getting into the marvelous land of Oz. We're about to start chapter 2. I'm doing alright. It was a Monday of Mondays, but I'm happy to be here with the Ghost fam, just reading some stories, relaxing, and yeah, really trying not to lean back. But you know what? I'm gonna lean back. I'm gonna put my feet up. I'm gonna try not to doze off while I'm reading, but I don't think that's possible. So yeah, let me know if this is still a good distance and you can still hear me okay. But we're going to get into the marvelous powder of life, which is chapter 2. I hope you're doing well, EDF. After considering the matter carefully, Tip decided that the best place to locate Jack would be at the bend in the road, a little way from the house. So he started to carry his man there, but found it very, very heavy and rather awkward to handle. After dragging the creature a short distance, Tip stood him on his feet, and by first bending the joints of one leg and then those of the other, at the same time, pushing from behind, the boy managed to induce Jack to walk to the bend in the road. It was not accomplished without a few tumbles, and Tip really worked harder than he ever had, in the fields or forest. But a love of mischief urged him on, and it pleased him to test the cleverness of his workmanship. "Jack's all right, and the work's fine," he said to himself, panting with the unusual exertion. But just then he discovered the man's left arm had fallen off in the journey, so he went back to find it, and afterward, by whittling a new and stouter pin for the shoulder joint, he repaired the injury so successfully that the arm was stronger than before. Tip also noticed that Jack's pumpkin head had twisted round until it faced his back, but this was easily remedied. When at last the man was set up facing the turn in the path where the old Mombi was to appear, He looked natural enough to be a fair imitation of a Gilligan farmer, and unnatural enough to startle anyone that came to him unawares. As it was yet too early in the day to expect the old woman to return home, Tip went down to the valley below the farmhouse and began to gather nuts from the trees that grew there. However, old Mombi returned earlier than usual. She had met a crooked wizard who resided in a lonely cave in the mountains, and had traded several important secrets of magic with him. Having in this way secured 3 new recipes, 4 magical powders, and a selection of herbs of wonderful power and potency, she hobbled home as fast as she could in order to test her new sorceries. So intent was Mombi on the treasure she had gained that when she turned the bend in the road and caught a glimpse of the man, she merely nodded and said, "Good evening, sir." But a moment after, noting that the person did not move or reply, she cast a shrewd glance into his face and discovered his pumpkin head, elaborately carved by Tip's jackknife. "Heh!" ejaculated Mombi, giving a short sort of grunt. "That rascally boy's been playing tricks again. Very good, very good. I'll beat him black and blue for trying to scare me in this fashion." Angrily, she raised her stick to smash in the grinning pumpkin head of the dummy, but in a sudden thought made her pause. The uplifted stick left motionless in the air. "Why, here's a good chance to try my new powder," she said eagerly, "and then I can tell whether that crooked wizard has fairly traded secrets, or whether he has fooled me as wickedly as I fooled him." So she set down her baskets and began fumbling in it for one of the precious powders she had obtained. While Mombi was thus occupied, Tip strolled back with his pockets full of nuts, and discovered the old woman standing beside his man, and apparently not the least bit frightened by it. At first he was generally disappointed, but the next moment he became curious to know what Mombi was going to do. So he hid behind the hedge, where he could see without being seen, and prepared to watch. After some search, the woman drew from her basket an old pepper box, upon the faded label of which the wizard had written, with a lead pencil, "Powder of Life." "Ah, here it is," she cried joyfully. "And now let us see if it is potent. The stingy wizard didn't give me much of it, but I guess there's enough for 2 or 3 doses." Tip was much surprised when he overheard the speech. Then he saw old Mombi raise her arm and sprinkle the powder from the box over the pumpkin head of this man Jack. She did this in the same way one would pepper a baked potato, and the powder sifted down from Jack's head and scattered over the red shirt and pink waistcoat and purple trousers Tip had dressed him in, and a portion even fell upon the patched and worn shoes. Sorry, y'all, there's no punctuation. Then, putting the pepper box into the basket, Mombi lifted her left hand with this little finger pointed upward and said, "Wow!" As she lifted her right hand with the thumb pointed upward, she said, "Teo!" Then she lifted both hands with all fingers and thumbs spread out and cried, "Pew!" Jet Pumpkinhead stepped back at this and said in a reproachful voice, "Don't yell like that. Do you think I'm deaf?" Old Mombi danced around him, frantic with delight. "He lives!" she screamed. "He lives! He lives!" Then she threw her stick into the air and caught it as it came down. She hugged herself with both arms and tried to do a step of a jig. And all the time she repeated rapturously, "He lives! He lives! He lives!" Now you may well suppose that Tip observed all this with amazement. At first he was so frightened and horrified that he wanted to run away, but his legs trembled and shook so badly that he couldn't. Then it struck him as a very funny thing for Jack to come to life, especially as the expression on this pumpkin's face was so droll and comical, it excited laughter on the instant. So, recovering from his first fear, Tip began to laugh, and the merry pells reached old Mombi's ears and made her hobble quickly to the hedge, where she seized Tip's collar and dragged him back to where she had left her basket and the pumpkin-headed man. "You naughty, sneaking, wicked boy!" she exclaimed furiously. "I'll teach you to spy out my secrets and make fun of me." "I wasn't making fun of you," protested Tip. "I was laughing at old Pumpkinhead. Look at him. Isn't he a picture, though?" "I hope you're not reflecting on my personal appearance," said Jack. And it was so funny to hear his grave voice, while his face continued to wear his jolly smile, that Tip began to burst into a pearl of laughter again. Even Mombi was not without a curious interest in the man her magic had brought to life, for after staring at him intently, she presently asked, "What do you know?" "Well, that is hard to tell," replied Jack, "for although I feel that I know a tremendous lot, I am not yet aware how much there is in the world to find out about. It will take me a little time to discover whether I am very wise or very foolish." "To be sure," said Mombi thoughtfully. "But what are you going to do with him now that he's alive?" asked Tip, wondering. "I must think it over," answered Mombi. "But we must get home at once, for it is growing dark. Help the Pumpkinhead to walk." "Never mind me," said Jack. "I can walk as well as you can. Haven't I got legs and feet? And aren't they jointed?" "They are." "Or are they?" asked the woman, turning to Tip. "Of course they are. I made them myself," returned the boy with pride. So they started for the house. But when they reached the farmyard, old Mombi led the Pumpkin Man to the cow stable and shut him up in an empty stall, fastening the door securely on the outside. "I've got to attend to you first," she said, nodding her head to Tip. Hearing this, the boy became uneasy, for he knew Mombi had a bad and vengeful heart, and would not hesitate to do any evil thing. They entered the house. It was a round, dome-shaped structure, as are nearly all the farmhouses in the land of Oz. Mombi bade the boy light a candle while she put her basket in the cupboard and hung her cloak on a peg. Tip obeyed quickly, for he was afraid of her. After the candle had been lighted, Mombi ordered him to build a fire in the hearth, and while Tip was thus engaged, the old woman ate her supper. When the flames began to cackle and crackle, the boy came to her and asked a share of bread and cheese, but Mombi refused him. "I'm hungry," said Tip in a sulky tone. "You won't be hungry long," replied Mombi with a grim look. The boy didn't like this speech, for it sounded like a threat. But he happened to remember he had nuts in his pocket, so he cracked some of those and ate them while the woman rose, shook the crumbs from her apron, and hung above the fire a small black kettle. Then she measured out equal parts of milk and vinegar and poured them into the kettle. Next, she produced several packets of herbs and powders and began adding a portion of each to the contents of the kettle. Occasionally, she would draw near the candle and read from a yellow paper the recipe of the mess she was concocting. As Tip watched her, his uneasiness increased. "What is that for?" he asked. "For you," returned Mombi briefly. Tip wiggled around upon his stool and stared a while at the kettle, which was beginning to bubble. Then he would glance at the stern and wrinkled features of the witch and wished he were any place but in that dim and smoky kitchen, where even the shadows cast by the kettle upon the wall were enough to give one the horrors. So an hour passed away, during which the silence was only broken by the bubbling of the pot and the hissing of the flames. Finally, Tip spoke again. "Have I got to drink that stuff?" he asked, nodding towards the pot. "Yes," said Mombi. "What'll it do to me?" asked Tip. "If it's properly made," replied Mombi, "it will change or transform you into a marble statue." Tip groaned and wiped the perspiration from his forehead with his sleeve. "I don't want to be a marble statue," he protested. "That doesn't matter. I want you to be one," said the old woman, looking at him severely. "What use will I be then?" asked Tip. "There won't be anyone to work for you." "I'll make the Pumpkinhead work for me," said Mombi. Tip groaned again. "Why don't you change me into a goat or a chicken?" he asked anxiously. "You can't do anything with a marble statue." "Oh, yes I can," returned Mombi. "I'm going to plant a flower garden next spring, and I'll put you in the middle of it for an ornament. I wonder if I haven't thought of that before. You've been a bother to me for years." At this terrible speech, Tip felt the beads of perspiration starting all over his body. But he sat still and shivered and looked anxiously at the kettle. "Perhaps it won't work," he muttered in a voice that sounded weak and discouraged. "Oh, I think it will," answered Mombi cheerfully. "I seldom make a mistake." Again there was a period of silence, a silence so long and gloomy that when Mombi finally lifted the kettle from the fire, it was close to midnight. "You cannot drink it until it has become quite cold," announced the old witch, for, in spite of the law, she had acknowledged practicing witchcraft. "We must both go to bed now, and at daybreak I will call you and at once complete your transformation into a marble statue." With this, she hobbled into her room, bearing the steaming kettle with her, and Tip heard her close and lock the door. The boy did not go to bed, as he had been commanded to do, but still sat glaring at the chambers of the dying fire. The embers of the dying fire. I'm sorry, y'all. I swear. I'm just a little tired. Words are jumping around. I apologize. I'm going to say goodnight in advance in the event that I pass out and everyone's still here. And I drift off. So much love to you amazing people. K-Drill, I'm sorry, man. I didn't see that before I started. I hope you have an amazing rest of your night. I appreciate you being here. It was a Monday. Indeed. Lately, every day feels like a Monday, I swear, right? Somebody's got to tell Monday. You just got to be yourself, man. All right. All right, come on. Come on. Come on, we got this. Chapter 3. Chapter 3. Half hour in. Yep. Chapter 3. The Flight of the Fugitives. Tip reflected. It's a hard thing to be a marble statue, he thought rebelliously, and I'm not going to stand for it. For years I've been a bother to her, she says, so she's going to get rid of me. Well, there's an easier way than to become a statue. No boy could have any fun forever standing in the middle of a flower garden. I'll run away. That's what I'll do. And I may as well go before she makes me drink that nasty stuff in the kettle. He waited until the snores of the old witch announced she was fast asleep. And then he arose softly and went to the cupboard to find something to eat. No use starting a journey without food, he decided, searching upon the narrow shelves. He found some crusted bread, but he had to look into Mommy's basket to find the cheese she had brought from the village. While turning over the contents of the basket, he came upon the pepper box, which contained the powder of life. I may as well take this with me, he thought, or Mombi will be using it to make more mischief with it. So he put the box in his pocket, together with the bread and cheese. Then he cautiously left the house and latched the door behind him. Outside, both moon and stars shone brightly, and the night seemed peaceful and inviting after the closed and ill-smelling kitchen. I'll be glad to get away, said Tip softly, for I never did like that old woman. I wonder how I ever did come to live with her. He was walking slowly towards the road when the thought made him pause. I don't like to leave Jack Pumpkinhead to the tender mercies of old Mombi, he muttered, and Jack belongs to me, for I made him, even if the old witch did bring him to life. He retraced his steps to the cow stable and opened the door of the stall where the pumpkin-headed man was left. Jack was standing in the middle of the stall, and by moonlight, Tip could see he was smiling just as jovially as ever. Come on, said the boy, beckoning. Where to? Asked Jack. You'll know as soon as I do, answered Tip, smiling sympathetically into the pumpkin face. All we've got to do now is to tramp. Very well, returned Jack, and walked awkwardly out of the stable and into the moonlight. Tip turned toward the road, and the man followed him. Jack walked with a sort of limp, and occasionally one of his joints of his legs would turn backwards instead of frontwise, almost causing him to tumble. But the Pumpkinhead was quick to notice this and began to take more pains to step carefully, so that he was met with fewer accidents. Tip led him along the path, without stopping for an instant. They could not go very fast, but they walked steadily. And by the time the moon sank away and the sun peeped over the hills, they had traveled so great a distance that the boy had no reason to fear pursuit of the old witch. Moreover, he had turned fast into one path and then into another, so that should anyone follow them, it would prove very difficult to guess which way they had gone or where to seek them. Fairly satisfied that he had escaped, for a time at least, being turned into a marble statue, the boy stopped his companion and seated himself upon a rock by the roadside. "Let's have some breakfast," he said. Jack Pumpkinhead watched Tip curiously, but refused to join in the repast. "I don't seem to be made of the same way you are," he said. "I know you're not," returned Tip, "for I made you." "Oh, did you?" asked Jack. "Certainly, and put you together, and carved your eyes and nose and ears and mouth," said Tip proudly, "and dressed you." Jack looked at his body and limbs critically. "It strikes me you made a very good job of it," he remarked. "Just so," replied Tip modestly, for he began to see certain defects in the construction of his man. "If I had known we were going to travel together, I might have been a little more particular." "Why then?" said the Pumpkinhead in a tone that expressed surprise. "You must be my creator, my parent, my father." "Or your inventor," replied the boy with a laugh. "Yes, my son, I really believe I am." "Then I owe you obedience," continued the man, "and you owe me support?" "That's it exactly," declared Tip, jumping up, "so let us be off." "Where are we going?" asked Jack, when they had resumed their journey. "I'm not exactly sure," said the boy, "but I believe we are headed south, and that will bring us, sooner or later, to the Emerald City." "What city is that?" inquired the Pumpkinhead. "Why, it's at the center of the Land of Oz, and the biggest town in all the country. I've never been there myself, but I've heard all about its history. It was built by a mighty and wonderful wizard named Oz, and everything there is of green color, just as everything in this country of the Gillikins is of purple color." "Is everything here purple?" asked Jack. "Of course it is, can't you see?" returned the boy. "I believe I must be colorblind," said the Pumpkinhead, after staring about him. "Well, the grass is purple, and the trees are purple, and the houses and fences are purple," explained Tip. "Even the mud in the roads is purple. But in the Emerald City, everything is green. That is purple here. And in the country of the Munchkins, over in the east, everything is blue. And in the south country of the Quadlings, everything is red. And in the west country of the Winkies, where the Tin Woodman rules, everything is yellow." "Oh," said Jack. Then, after a pause, he asked, "Did you say a Tin Woodman rules the Winkies?" "Yes. He was one of those who helped Dorothy to destroy the Wicked Witch of the West, and the Winkies were so grateful they invited him to become their ruler, just as the people of the Emerald City invited the Scarecrow to rule over them." "Dear me," said Jack. "I'm getting confused with all this history. Who is the Scarecrow?" "Another friend of Dorothy's," replied Tip. "And who is Dorothy?" "She was a girl that came here from Kansas, a place in a big outside world. She got blown to the Land of Oz by a cyclone, and while she was here, the Scarecrow and Tin Woodman accompanied her on her travels." "And where is she now?" inquired the Pumpkinhead. "Glinda the Good, who rules the Quadlings, sent her home," said the boy. "Oh, and what became of the Scarecrow?" "I told you, he rules the Emerald City," answered Tip. "I thought you said it was ruled by the wonderful wizard," objected Jack, seeming more and more confused. "Well, so I did. Now pay attention, and I'll explain it," said Tip, speaking slowly, and looking the smiling Pumpkinhead squarely in the eye. "Dorothy went to the Emerald City to ask the wizard to send her back to Kansas, and the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman went with her. But the wizard couldn't send her back because he wasn't much of a wizard as he might have been. And then they got angry at the wizard and threatened to expose him, so the wizard made a big balloon and escaped in it, and no one has seen him ever since." "Now that is very interesting history," said Jack, very pleased. "And I understand it perfectly, all but the explanation." "I'm glad you do," responded Tip. "After the wizard was gone, the people of the Emerald City made His Majesty the Scarecrow their king, and I have heard that he became a very popular ruler. Are we going to see this queer king? Asked Jack with interest. I think we may as well, replied the boy, unless you have something better to do. Oh no, dear father, said the Pumpkinhead. I am quite willing to go wherever you please. It's good to see you, friend Baffy. It's good to see you. Hope you're doing well, Becca. I miss you. Extra avocado with the jack-o'-lantern. Have to head off to meetings. Sorry, afternoons are always super busy. No worries at all, Haley, and I appreciate you being here, even if but for a spell. You know, it's always good to see you. It's good to see you, Baffy. Stafford saying bye. Excellent. That was a nice little sum up of The Wizard of Oz. Oh, bye to Haley. Now we're going to get into that box that he took from old Mombi. It looks like Tip Makes an Experiment in Magic, Chapter 4. I don't think Tip should be experimenting with anything he took from old Mombi. But we shall see. We shall see. Tip makes an experiment in magic. Oh. Just adjusting. The boy, small and rather delicate in appearance, seems somewhat embarrassed at being called father by the tall, awkward, pumpkin-headed man. But to deny the relationship would involve another long and tedious explanation. So he changed the subject by asking abruptly, "Are you tired?" "Of course not," replied the other. "But," he continued after a pause, "it is quite certain I shall wear out my wooden joints if I keep on walking." Tip reflected, as they journeyed on, that this was true. He began to regret he had not constructed the wooden limbs more carefully and substantially. Yet, how could he have ever guessed that the man he had made merely to scare old Mombi would be brought to life by means of a magical powder contained in an old pepper box? So he ceased to reproach himself, and began to think of how he might remedy the deficiencies of Jack's weak joints. While thus engaged, they came to the edge of a wood, and the boy sat down to rest upon an old sawhorse that some woodcutter had left there. "Why don't you sit down?" he asked the Pumpkinhead. "Won't it strain my joints?" inquired the other. "Of course not. It'll rest them," declared the boy. So Jack tried to sit down. But as soon as he bent his joints further than usual, they gave way altogether, and he came clattering to the ground with such a crash that Tip feared he was entirely ruined. He rushed to the man, lifted him to his feet, straightened his arms and legs, and felt of his head to see if by chance it had become cracked. But Jack seemed to be in pretty good shape, after all, and Tip said to him, "I guess you'd better remain standing hereafter. It seems the safest way." "Very well, dear father. Just as you say," replied the smiling Jack, who had been in no wise confused by his tumble. Tip sat down again. Presently the Pumpkinhead asked, "What is that thing you are sitting on?" "Oh, this is a horse," replied the boy carelessly. "What is a horse?" demanded Jack. "A horse? Why, there are two kinds of horses," returned Tip, slightly puzzled how to explain. "One kind of horse is alive and has 4 joints and a head and a tail, and people ride upon its back." "I understand," said Jack cheerfully. "That's the kind of horse you are now sitting on." "No, it isn't," answered Tip promptly. "Why not? That one has 4 legs and a head and a tail." Tip looked at the sawhorse more carefully and found that the Pumpkinhead was right. The body had been formed from a tree trunk, and the branch had been left sticking up at one end and looked very much like a tail. At the other end were 2 big knots that resembled eyes, and a place that had been chopped away that might easily be mistaken for the horse's mouth. As for the legs, they were 4 straight limbs cut from trees and stuck fast into the body, being spread wide apart so that the sawhorse would stand firmly when a log was laid across it to be sawed. "This thing resembles a real horse more than I imagined," said Tip, trying to explain. "But a real horse is alive, and trots and prances and eats oats, while this is nothing more than a dead horse made of wood, and used to saw logs upon." "If it were alive, wouldn't it trot and prance and eat oats?" inquired the Pumpkinhead. "It would trot and prance, perhaps, but it wouldn't eat oats," replied the boy, laughing at the idea. "And of course it can't ever be alive because it's made of wood." "So am I," answered the man. Tip looked at him in surprise. "Why, so you are," he exclaimed, "and the magic powder that brought you to life is here in my pocket." He brought out the pepper box and eyed it curiously. "I wonder," he said musingly, "if it would bring the sawhorse to life." "If it would," returned Jack, calmly, for nothing seemed to surprise him, "I could ride on his back, and that would save my joints from wearing out." "I'll try it," cried the boy, jumping up. "But I wonder if I can remember the words old Mombi said, and the way she held her hands up." He thought it over a minute, and as he had watched carefully from the hedge every motion of the old witch, and listened to her words, he believed he could repeat exactly what she had said and done. So he began by sprinkling some of the magic powder of life from the pepper box upon the body of the sawhorse. Then he lifted his hand with his little finger pointed upwards and said, "Wagyu!" "What does that mean, dear father?" asked Jack curiously. "I don't know," answered Tip. Then he lifted his right hand with his thumb pointed upward and said, "Teyu!" "What is that, dear father?" inquired Jack. "It means you must keep quiet," replied the boy, provoked at being interrupted at so important a moment. "How fast I am learning," remarked the Pumpkinhead with his eternal smile. Tip now lifted both hands above his head with all fingers and thumbs spread out and cried in a loud voice, "Payu!" Immediately the sawhorse moved, stretched its legs, yawned with its chopped-out mouth, and shook a few grains of the powder off its back. The rest of the powder seemed to have vanished into the body of the horse. "Good!" called Jack while the boy looked on in astonishment. "You are a very clever sorcerer, dear father." Hey, Hungry Hollow. It's good to see you, fam. I hope you're doing well. Hope you're doing well. Got a third companion. Got a sawhorse. That's cool. I wonder if the sawhorse has a name or if it's just the sawhorse. I wonder if it will talk as well. As we get into chapter 4, the awakening of the sawhorse. The sawhorse, finding himself alive, seemed even more astonished than Tip. He rolled his knotty eyes from side to side, taking a first wondering view of the world in which he had now so important an existence. Then he tried to look at himself, but he had indeed no neck to turn. So that the endeavor to see his body, he kept circling around and around without catching even a glimpse of it. His legs were stiff and awkward, for there were no knee joints in them, so that presently he bumped against Jack Pumpkinhead and sent that personage tumbling upon the moss that lined the roadside. Tip became alarmed at the accident, as well as the persistence of the sawhorse in prancing around in a circle, so he called out, "Whoa, whoa there!" The sawhorse paid no attention whatsoever to his command, and in the next instant brought one of his wooden legs down upon Tip's foot so forcefully that the boy danced away in pain to a safer distance, from where he yelled again, "Whoa, whoa, I say!" Jack had now managed to rise himself to a sitting position, and he looked at the sawhorse with much interest. "I don't believe the animal can hear you," he remarked. "I shout loud enough, don't I?" answered Tip angrily. "Yes, but the horse has no ears," said the smiling Pumpkinhead. "Sure enough," exclaimed Tip, noting the fact for the first time. "How then am I going to stop him?" But at that instant the sawhorse stopped himself, having concluded it was impossible to see his own body. He saw Tip, however, and came close to the boy to observe him more fully. It was really comical to see the creature walk, for it moved its legs on its right side together and those on its left side together, as a prancing horse does, and that made his body rock sideways like a cradle. Tip patted it upon its head and said, good boy," in a coaxing tone, and the sawhorse pranced away to examine, with its bulging eyes, the form of Jack Pumpkinhead. "I must find a halter for him," said Tip, and having made a search in his pocket, he produced a roll of strong cord. Unwinding this, he approached the sawhorse and tied the cord around his neck, afterward fastening the other end to a large tree. The sawhorse, not understanding the action, stepped backward and snapped the string easily, but it made no attempt to run away. "He's stronger than I thought," said the boy, "and rather obstinate, too." "Why don't you make him some ears?" asked Jack. "Then you can tell him what to do." "That's a splendid idea," said Tip. "How did you happen to think of it?" "Why, I didn't think of it," answered the Pumpkinhead. "I didn't need to, for it's the simplest and easiest thing to do." So Tip got out his knife and fashioned some ears out of bark of a small tree. "I mustn't make 'em too big," he said, as he whittled, "or a horse would become a donkey." "How is that?" inquired Jack from the roadside. "Why, a horse has bigger ears than a man, and a donkey has bigger ears than a horse," explained Tip. "Then if my ears were longer, would I be a horse?" asked Jack. "My friend," said Tip gravely, "you'll never be anything but a pumpkin head, no matter how big your ears are." "Oh," returning Jack, nodding, "I think I understand." "If you do, you're a wonder," remarked the boy. "But there's no harm in thinking you understand. I guess these ears are ready now. Will you hold the horse while I stick 'em on?" "Certainly, if you'll help me up," said Jack. So Tip raised him to his feet, and the Pumpkinhead went to the horse and held his head while the boy bored 2 holes in with his knife and blade and inserted the ears. "They make him look very handsome," said Jack admiringly. But those words, spoken close to the sawhorse, and being the first sounds he had ever heard, so startled the animal that he made a bound forward and tumbled Tip on one side and Jack on the other. Then he continued to rush forward as if frightened by the clatter of his own footsteps. "Whoa!" shouted Tip, picking himself up. "Whoa, you idiot, whoa!" The sawhorse would probably have paid no attention to this, but just then it stepped a leg into a gopher hole and stumbled head over heels into the ground, where it lay upon its back, frantically waving its 4 legs in the air. Tip ran up to it. "You're a nice sort of horse, I must say," he exclaimed. "Why didn't you stop when I yelled whoa?" "Does whoa mean to stop?" asked the sawhorse in a surprised voice, as it rolled its eyes upward to look at the boy. "Of course it does," answered Tip. "And a hole in the ground means to stop also, doesn't it?" continued the horse. "To be sure, unless you step over it," said Tip. "What a strange place this is," the creature exclaimed, as if amazed. "What am I doing here, anyway?" "Why, I brought you to life," answered the boy. "But it won't hurt you, anyway, if you mind me and do as I tell you." "Then I will do as you tell me," replied the sawhorse humbly. "But what happened to me a moment ago? I don't seem to be just right some way." "You're upside down," exclaimed Tip. "But just keep those legs still a minute, and I'll set you right side up again." "How many sides have I?" asked the creature wonderingly. "Several," said Tip briefly. "But do keep those legs still." The sawhorse now became quiet and held his legs rigid so that Tip, after several efforts, was able to roll him over and set him upright. "Ah, I seem all right now," said the queer animal with a sigh. "One of your ears is broken," Tip announced. "After a careful examination, I'll have to make a new one." Then he led the sawhorse back to where Jack was vainly struggling to regain his feet, and after assisting the Pumpkinhead to stand upright, Tip whittled out a new ear and fastened it to the horse's head. "Now," he said, addressing his steed, "pay attention to what I'm going to tell you. Whoa means stop. Get up means to walk faster. Trot means to go as fast as you can. Understand?" "I believe I do," returned the horse. "Very good. We're all going on a journey to the Emerald City to see His Majesty the Scarecrow." and Jack Pumpkinhead is going to ride on your back so he won't wear out his joints." "I don't mind," said the Sawhorse. "Anything that suits you suits me." Then Tip assisted Jack to get on the horse. "Hold on tight," he cautioned, "or you may fall off and crack your pumpkin head." "That would be horrible," said Jack with a shudder. "What shall I hold on to?" "Why, hold on to his ears," replied Tip. After a moment's hesitation, "Don't do that," remonstrated the Sawhorse, "for I can't hear." That seems reasonable, so Tip tried to think of something else. "I'll fix it," he said at length. He went into the wood and cut a short length of limb from a young stout tree. One end of this he sharpened into a point, and then he dug a hole on the back of the Sawhorse just behind his head. Next, he brought the piece of rock from the road and hammered the post firmly into the animal's back. Ouch. "Stop, stop!" shouted the horse. "You're jarring me terribly." "Does it hurt?" asked the boy. "Not exactly hurt," answered the animal, "but it makes me quite nervous to be jarred." "Well, it's all over now," said Tip, encouragingly. "Now, Jack, be sure to hold on fast to this post, and then you can't fall off and get smashed." So Jack held on tight, and Tip said to the horse, "Get up." The obedient creature at once walked forward, rocking from side to side as he raised his feet from the ground. Tip walked beside the horse, quite content with this addition to their party. Presently he began to whistle. "What does that sound mean?" asked the horse. Don't pay any attention to it," said Tip. "I'm just whistling, and that only means I'm pretty well satisfied." "I'll whistle myself, if I could push my lips together," remarked Jack. "I fear, dear father, that in some respects I am sadly lacking." After journeying on for some distance, the narrow path they were following turned into a broad roadway, paved with yellow brick. By the side of the road, Tip noticed a signpost that read 9 miles to the Emerald City. But it was now growing dark, so he decided to camp for the night by the roadside, and to resume his journey next morning by daybreak. He led the Sawhorse to a grassy mound upon which he saw several bushy trees, and carefully assisted the Pumpkinhead to alight. "I think I'll lay you upon the ground overnight," said the boy. "You will be safer that way." "How about me?" asked the Sawhorse. "It won't hurt you to stand," replied Tip. "And, as you can't sleep, you might as well watch out and see no one comes near to disturb us." Then the boy stretched himself upon the grass beside the Pumpkinhead, and being greatly wearied by the journey, was soon fast asleep. Two, three, four, five, six. Alright, starting chapter 6. I forgot what chapter we were on. Hey, Adam Jones, how's it going, man? It's good to see you. It's going well. It's been a Monday for sure. We're just starting the second book in the Wizard of Oz series. It's proving to be just a little bit of a challenging read for me. Just a Monday, my eyes are super droopy. But we are starting chapter 6 here, and we just passed that first hour. We'll be going for about another hour reading, and we should be able to make it to chapter 9. But it's really good to see you, fam, and I hope you're doing well. Happy Monday. Alright, chapter 6. Jack Pumpkinhead's Ride to the Emerald City. At daybreak, Tip was awakened by the Pumpkinhead. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes, bathed in a little brook, and then ate a portion of his bread and cheese. Having thus prepared for a new day, the boy said, "Let us start at once. 9 miles is quite a distance, but we ought to reach the Emerald City by noon if no accidents happen." So the Pumpkinhead was again perched upon the back of the Sawhorse, and the journey was resumed. Tip noticed that the purple tint of the grass and trees had now faded to a dull lavender. and before long this lavender appeared to take on a greenish tinge that gradually brightened as they drew nearer to the great city where the Scarecrow ruled. The little party had traveled but a short 2 miles upon their way, when the road of yellow brick was parted by a broad and swift river. Tip was puzzled how to cross over, but after some time he discovered a man in a ferry boat approached from the other side of the stream. When the man reached the bank, Tip asked, "Will you row us to the other side?" "Yes, if you have money," returned the ferryman, whose face looked cross and disagreeable. "But I have no money," said Tip. "None at all?" inquired the man. "None at all," answered the boy. "Then I'll not break my back rowing you over," said the ferryman decidedly. "What a nice man," remarked the pumpkin man, smiling. The ferryman stared at him, but made no reply. Tip was trying to think, for it was a great disappointment to him to find his journey so suddenly brought to an end. "I must certainly get to the Emerald City," he said to the boatman. "But how can I cross the river if you do not take me?" The man laughed, and it was not a nice laugh. "That wooden horse will float," he said, "and you can ride him across. As for the Pumpkinhead, loon, who accompanies you, let him sink or swim, it won't matter greatly which." "Don't worry about me," said Jack, smiling pleasantly upon the crabbed ferryman. "I'm sure I ought to float beautifully." Tip thought the experiment was worth making, and the sawhorse, who did not know what danger meant, offered no objections whatsoever. So the boy led it down to the water and climbed upon its back. Jack also waded in up to his knees and grasped the tail of the horse so that he might keep his pumpkin head above the water. "Now," said Tip, instructing the sawhorse, "if you wiggle your legs, you will probably swim, and if you swim, we shall probably reach the other side." The sawhorse at once began to wiggle its legs, which acted as oars in moving the adventurers slowly across the river to the opposite side. So successful was the trip that presently they were climbing wet and dripping up the grassy bank. Tip's trouser legs and shoes were thoroughly soaked, but the sawhorse had floated so perfectly that from his knees up the boy was entirely dry. As for the Pumpkinhead, every stitch of his gorgeous clothing dripped water. "The sun will soon dry us," said Tip, "and anyhow, we are now safely across in spite of the ferryman, and can continue our journey." "I didn't mind swimming at all," remarked the horse. "Nor did I," added Jack. They soon regained the road of yellow brick, which proved to be a continuation of the road they had left on the other side. And then Tip once more mounted the Pumpkinhead upon the back of the sawhorse. "If you ride fast," he said, "the wind will help dry your clothing. I will hold on to the horse's tail and run after you. In this way we will all become dry in a very short time." "Then the horse must step lively," said Jack. "I'll do my best," returned the sawhorse cheerfully. Tip grasped the end of the branch that had served as a tail to the sawhorse and called out loudly, "Get up!" The horse started at a good pace, and Tip followed behind. Then he decided they could go faster and shouted, "Trot!" Now the sawhorse remembered that this word was the command to go as fast as you could. So he began rocking along the road at a tremendous pace, and Tip had hard work running faster than he ever had before in his life to keep his feet. Soon he was out of breath, and although he wanted to call "Whoa!" to the horse, he found he could not get the word out of his throat. Then the end of the tail he was clutching, being nothing more than a dead branch, suddenly broke away, and the next minute the boy was rolling in the dust of the road while the horse and its pumpkin-headed rider dashed on quickly, disappeared into the distance. By the time Tip had picked himself up and cleared the dust from his throat so he could say "Whoa!" there was no further need of saying it, for the horse was long since out of sight. So he did the only sensible thing he could do. He sat down, took a good rest, and afterward began walking along the road. "Sometime I will surely overtake them," he reflected, "for the road will end at the gates of the Emerald City, and they can go no further than that." Meantime, Jack was holding fast to the post, and The sawhorse was tearing along the road like a racer. Neither of them knew Tip was left behind, for the Pumpkinhead did not look around and the sawhorse couldn't. As he rode, Jack noticed that the grass and trees had become a bright emerald green in color, so he guessed they were nearing the Emerald City, even before the tall spires and the domes came into sight. At length, a high wall of green stones, studded thick with emeralds, loomed up before them, and fearing the sawhorse would not know enough to stop, and so might smash them both against the wall, Jack ventured to cry, "Whoa!" as loud as he could. So suddenly did the horse obey that it had not been for his post, Jack would have been pitched off head foremost and his beautiful face ruined. "That was a fast ride, dear father," he exclaimed, and then, hearing no reply, he turned around and discovered for the first time that Tip was not there. This apparent desertion puzzled the Pumpkinhead and made him uneasy, and while he was wondering what had become of the boy, and what he ought to do next under such trying circumstances, the gateway in the green wall opened and a man came out. This man was short and round, with a fat face that seemed remarkably good-natured. He was clothed in all green and wore a high peaked hat on his head and green spectacles over his eyes. Bowing before the Pumpkinhead, he said, "I am the guardians of the gates of the Emerald City. May I inquire who you are and what is your business?" "My name is Jack Pumpkinhead," returned the other smilingly. "But as to my business, I haven't the least idea in the world of what that is." The guardian of the gate looked surprised and shook his head as if dissatisfied with the reply. "What are you, a man or a pumpkin?" he asked politely. "Both, if you please," answered Jack. "And this wooden horse, is it alive?" questioned the guardian. The horse rolled one naughty eye upward and winked at Jack. Then it gave a prance and brought one leg down on the guardian's toes. "Ouch!" cried the man. "I'm sorry I asked that question, but the answer is most convincing." "Have you any errand, sir, in the Emerald City?" "It seems to me that I have," replied the Pumpkinhead seriously. "But I can't think of what it is. My father knows all about it, but he's not here." "This is a strange affair, very strange," declared the guardian. "But you seem harmless. Folks do not smile so delightfully when they mean mischief." "As for that," said Jack, "I cannot help my smile, for it is carved on my face with a jackknife." "Well, come with me into my room," resumed the guardian, "and I will see what can be done for you." So Jack rode the sawhorse through the gateway into the little room built into the wall. The guardian pulled a bell cord, and presently a very tall soldier, clothed in a green uniform, entered from the opposing door. The soldier carried a long green gun over his shoulder and had lovely green whiskers that fell quite to his knees. The guardian at once addressed him, saying, "Here's a strange gentleman who doesn't know why he's come to the Emerald City or what he wants. Tell me, what shall we do with him?" The soldier with the green whiskers looked at Jack with much care and curiosity. Finally, he shook his head so positively that little waves rippled down his whiskers. And he then said, "I must take him to His Majesty the Scarecrow." "But what will His Majesty the Scarecrow do with him?" asked the guardian of the gates. "That is His Majesty's business," returned the soldier. "I have troubles enough of my own. All outside troubles must be turned over to His Majesty. So put the spectacles on this fellow, and I'll take him to his royal palace." So the guardian opened his big box of spectacles and tried to fit a pair to Jack's great round eyes. "I haven't a pair in stock that will really cover those eyes up," said the little man, with a sigh. "And your head is so big that I shall be obliged to tie the spectacles on." "But why do I need to wear spectacles?" asked Jack. "It's the fashion here," said the soldier, "and they will keep you from being blinded by the glitter and glare of the gorgeous Emerald City." "Oh!" exclaimed Jack. "Tie them on, by all means. I don't wish to be blinded." "Nor I," broke in the sawhorse. So a pair of green spectacles was quickly fastened over the bulging knots that served for its eyes, and the soldier with the green whiskers led them through the inner gate, and they at once found themselves in the main street of the magnificent Emerald City. Sparkling green gems ornamented the fronts of the beautiful houses, and the towers and turrets were all faced with emeralds. Even the green marble pavements glittered with precious stones. and it was indeed a grand and marvelous sight to one who beheld it for the first time. However, the Pumpkinhead and the Sawhorse, knowing nothing of wealth and beauty, paid little attention to the wonderful sights they saw through their green spectacles. They calmly followed after the green soldier and scarcely noticed the crowds of green people who stared at them in surprise. When a green dog ran out and barked at them, and the Sawhorse promptly kicked at it with its wooden leg and sent the little animal howling into one of the houses. But nothing more serious than this happened to interrupt their progress to the royal palace. The Pumpkinhead wanted to ride up the green marble steps and straight into the Scarecrow's presence, but the soldiers would not permit that, so Jack dismounted with much difficulty, and a servant led the Sawhorse around to the rear while the soldiers with the green whiskers escorted the Pumpkinhead into the palace by the front entrance. The stranger was left in a handsomely furnished waiting room while the soldier went to announce him. It so happened that at this hour His Majesty was at leisure and greatly bored for want of something to do, so he ordered his visitor to be shown in at once into his throne room. Jack felt no fear or embarrassment at meeting the ruler of this magnificent city, so he was entirely ignorant of all the worldly customs. But when he entered the room and saw for the first time His Majesty the Scarecrow seated upon his glistening throne, he stopped short in amazement. Hey, Go Spencer, how's it going? It's good to see you. That was the end of chapter 6. They just made it back to the Emerald City, and we are now seeing our good friend the Scarecrow for the second time. Really appreciate you guys being here. Just give me 1 second. I want to make sure. All right, there we go. All right. Getting into chapter 7 is His Majesty the Scarecrow. Whew, started getting a little warm. I suppose every reader of this book knows what a scarecrow is. But Jack Pumpkinhead, never having seen such a creation, was more surprised at meeting the remarkable king of Emerald City than by any other one experienced of his brief life. His Majesty the Scarecrow was dressed in a suit of faded blue clothes, and his head was merely a small sack of stuffed straw, upon which eyes, ears, a nose, and a mouth had been rudely painted to represent a face. The clothes were also stuffed with straw, and that so unevenly or carelessly that His Majesty's legs and arms seemed more bumpy than was necessary. Upon his hands were gloves with long fingers, and these were padded with cotton. Wisps of straw stuck out from the monarch's coat, and also from his neck and boot tops. Upon his head he wore a heavy golden crown set thick with sparkling jewels, and the weight of this crown caused his brow to sag in wrinkles, giving a thoughtful expression to the painted face indeed. The crown alone betokened majesty, and all else the Scarecrow King was but a simple scarecrow, flimsy, awkward, and unsubstantial. But if the strange appearance of His Majesty the Scarecrow seemed startling to Jack, no less wonderful was the form of the Pumpkinhead to the Scarecrow. The purple trousers and pink waistcoat and red shirt hung loosely over the wooden joints Tip had manufactured, and the carved face of the pumpkin grinned perpetually, as if its wearer considered life the jolliest thing imaginable. At first, indeed, His Majesty thought this queer visitor was laughing at him, and was inclined to resent such a liberty, but it was not without reason that the Scarecrow had attained the reputation of being the wisest personage in the land of Oz. He made a more careful examination of his visitor and soon discovered that Jack's features were carved into a smile and that he could not look grave if he wished to. The king was the first to speak. After regarding Jack for some minutes, he said in a tone of wonder, "Where on earth did you come from? And how do you happen to be alive?" "I beg your majesty's pardon," returned the Pumpkinhead, "but I do not understand you." "What don't you understand?" asked the Scarecrow. "Why, I don't understand your language. You see, came from the country of the Gillikins, so I am a foreigner." "Ah, to be sure," exclaimed the Scarecrow. "I myself speak the language of the Munchkins, which is also the language of the Emerald City. But you, I suppose, speak the language of the Pumpkinheads." "Exactly so, your majesty," replied the other, bowing. "So it will be impossible for us to understand one another." "That is unfortunate, certainly," said the Scarecrow thoughtfully. "We must have an interpreter." "What is an interpreter?" asked Jack. "A person who understands both my language and your own. Why, I say anything, the interpreter can tell you what I mean, and when you say anything, the interpreter can tell me what you mean, for the interpreter can speak both languages, as well as understand them." "That is certainly clever," said Jack, greatly pleased at finding so simple a way out of this difficulty. So the Scarecrow commanded the soldier with green whiskers to search among his people until he found one who understood the language of the Gillikins as well as the language of the Emerald City, and to bring that person to him at once. When the soldier had departed, the Scarecrow said, "Won't you take a chair while we're waiting?" "Your Majesty forgets that I cannot understand you," replied the Pumpkinhead. "If you wish me to sit down, you must make a sign for me to do so." The Scarecrow came down from his throne and rolled an armchair into position behind the Pumpkinhead, then gave Jack a sudden push that sent him sprawling back upon the cushions in so awkward a fashion he doubled up like a jackknife, and had hard work to untangle himself. "Did you understand that sign?" asked His Majesty politely. "Perfectly," declared Jack, reaching up his arms and turning his head to the front, the pumpkin having twisted around upon a stick that supported it. "You seem hastily made," remarked the Scarecrow, watching Jack's efforts to straighten himself. "Not more so than your Majesty," was the frank reply. "There is a difference between us," said the Scarecrow, "that whereas I will bend but not break, you will break but not bend." At this moment the soldier returned, leading a young girl by the hand. She seemed very sweet and modest, having a pretty face and beautiful green eyes and hair, and dainty green silk skirt reached to her knees, showing silk stockings embroidered with pea pods, and green satin slippers with bunches of lettuce for decoration instead of bows or buckles. Upon her silken waist clover leaves were embroidered, and she wore a jaunty little jacket trimmed with sparkling emeralds of a uniform size. "Why, it's little Jella Jam!" exclaimed the Scarecrow, as the Green Maiden bowed her pretty head before him. "Do you understand the language of the Gillikins, my dear?" "Yes, your Majesty," she answered, "for I was born in the North Country." "Then you shall be our interpreter," said the Scarecrow, "and explain to this Pumpkinhead all that I say, and also explain to me all that he says. Is this arrangement satisfactory?" he asked, turning towards his guest. "Very satisfactory indeed," was the reply. "Then ask him to begin with," resumed the Scarecrow, turning to Jellia. "What brought him to the Emerald City?" But instead of this, the girl who had been staring at Jack said to him, "You are certainly a wonderful creature. Who made you?" "A boy named Tip," answered Jack. "What does he say?" inquired the Scarecrow. "My ears must have deceived me. What did he say?" "He says that your Majesty's brains seem to have come loose," replied the girl demurely. The Scarecrow moved uneasily upon his throne and felt of his head with his left hand. "What a fine thing it is to understand two different languages," he said, with a perplexed sigh. "Ask him, my dear, if he has any objection to being put in jail for insulting the ruler of the Emerald City." "I didn't insult you," protested Jack indignantly. "Tut, tut," cautioned the Scarecrow. "Wait until Jellia translates my speech. What have we got an interpreter for if you break out of this rash way?" "All right, I'll wait," replied the Pumpkinhead, in a surly tone, although his face smiled as genially as ever. Translate the speech, young woman. His Majesty inquires if you are hungry, asked Jellia. Oh, not at all, answered Jack more pleasantly, for it is impossible for me to eat. It's the same way with me, remarked the Scarecrow. What did he say, Jellia, my dear? He asked if you were aware that one of your eyes is painted larger than the other, said the girl mischievously. Don't you believe her, your Majesty? Cried Jack. Oh, I don't, answered the Scarecrow calmly. Then, casting a sharp look at the girl, he asked, Are you quite certain you understand the languages of both the Gillikins and the Munchkins? Quite certain, your Majesty, said Jellia Jam, trying hard not to laugh in the face of royalty. Then how is it that I seem to understand them myself? Inquired the Scarecrow. Because they are one and the same, declared the girl, now laughing merrily. Does not your Majesty know that in all the land of Oz but one language is spoken? Is it indeed so? Cried the Scarecrow, much relieved to hear this. Then I might easily have been my own interpreter. It was all my fault, your Majesty, said Jack, looking rather foolish. I thought we must surely speak different languages, since we come from different countries. This should be a warning to you never to think, returned the Scarecrow severely. For unless one can think wisely, it is better to remain a dummy, which you most certainly are. I surely am, agreed the Pumpkinhead. It seems to me, continued the Scarecrow more mildly, that your manufacturer spoiled some good pies to create an indifferent man. I assure your Majesty that I did not ask to be created, answered Jack. Ah, it was the same in my case, said the king. And so, as we differ from all ordinary people, let us become friends. With all my heart, exclaimed Jack. What? Have you a heart? Asked the Scarecrow, surprised. No, that was only imaginative, I might say, a figure of speech, said the other. Well, your most prominent figure seems to be a figure of wood, so I must beg you to refrain from imagination, which, having no brains, you have no right to exercise, suggested the Scarecrow warningly. To be sure, said Jack, without in the least comprehending. His Majesty then dismissed Jellia Jam and the soldier with the green whiskers, and they were gone. And when they were gone, he took his new friend by the arm and led him to the courtyard to play a game of quoits. Cool. Well, that was an interesting little read. I have to say that was absolutely hilarious to me, this whole chapter. Talking to each other about needing an interpreter. I mean, it's just apparent that both of them are a little daft. And kudos to Jellia for speaking it to him straight. Because I was like, this is going to get annoying, interpreting it over and over again. Alright. General Ginger's Army of Revolt. And Ginger is spelled with a J. J-I-N-J-U-R. Ginger. Tip was so anxious to rejoin his man Jack and the Sawhorse that he walked a full half the distance to the Emerald City without stopping to rest. Then he discovered that he was hungry, and the crackers and cheese he had provided for his journey had all been eaten. While wondering what he should do in this emergency, he came upon a girl sitting by the roadside. She wore a costume that struck the boy as being remarkably brilliant, her silken waist being of emerald green and her skirt of 4 distinct colors, blue in front, yellow at the left side, red at the back, and purple at the right side. Fastening the waist in front were 4 buttons, the top one blue, the next yellow, the third red, and the last one purple. The splendor of this dress was almost barbaric, so Tip was fully justified in staring at the gown for some moments before his eyes were attracted by the pretty face above it. Yes, the face was pretty enough, he decided, but it wore an expression of discontent, coupled to a shade of defiance or audacity. While the boy stared at the girl looking upon him calmly, a lunch basket stood beside her, and she held a dainty sandwich in one hand and a hard-boiled egg in the other, eating with an evident appetite that aroused Tip's sympathy. He was just about to ask a share of the luncheon when the girl stood up and brushed the crumbs from her lap. "There," she said. "It's time for me to go. Carry that basket for me and help yourself to its contents if you're hungry." Tip seized the basket eagerly and began to eat, following for a time the strange girl without bothering to ask questions. She walked along before him with swift strides, and there was about her an air of decision and importance that led him to suspect she was of some great personage. Finally, when he had satisfied his hunger, he ran up beside her and tried to keep pace with her swift footsteps, a very difficult feat, for she was much taller than he, and evidently in a hurry. "Thank you very much for the sandwiches," said Tip, as he trotted along. "May I ask your name?" "I am General Ginger," was the brief reply. "Oh," said the boy in surprise. "What sort of general?" "I command the army of revolt in this war," answered the general, with unnecessary sharpness. "Oh?" he exclaimed again. "I didn't know there was a war." "You were not supposed to know it," she returned, "for we have kept it a secret, and considering that our army is composed entirely of girls," he added, with some pride. She added with some pride, "It is surely a remarkable thing that our revolt is not yet discovered." "It is indeed," acknowledged Tip. "But where is your army?" "About a mile from here," said General Ginger. "The forces have assembled from all parts of the land of Oz at my express command. For this is the day we are to conquer His Majesty the Scarecrow and wrest from him the throne. The army of revolt only awaits my coming to march upon the Emerald City." "Well," declared Tip, drawing a long breath, "this is certainly a surprising thing. May I ask why you wish to conquer His Majesty the Scarecrow?" "Because the Emerald City has been ruled by man long enough, for one reason," said the girl. "Moreover, the city glitters with beautiful gems that might far better be used for rings, bracelets, and necklaces, and there is enough money in the king's treasure to buy every girl in our army a dozen new gowns. So we intend to conquer the city and run the government to suit ourselves." Ginger spoke these words with an eagerness and decision that proved she was in earnest. "But war is a terrible thing," said Tip thoughtfully. "This war will be pleasant," replied the girl cheerfully. "Many of you will be slain," continued the boy in an awed voice. "Oh, no," said Ginger. "What man would oppose a girl or dare to harm her? And there is not an ugly face in my entire army." Tip laughed. "Perhaps you're right," he said, "but the guardian of the gate is considered a faithful guardian, and the king's army will not let the city be conquered without a struggle." "The army is old and feeble," replied General Ginger scornfully. "His strengths have all been used to grow whiskers, and his wife has such a temper that she has already pulled more than half of them out by the roots. When the wonderful wizard reigned, the soldier with the green whiskers was a very good royal army, for people feared the wizard. But no one is afraid of the Scarecrow, so his royal army doesn't count for much in time of war." After this conversation, they proceeded some distance in silence, and before long reached a large clearing in the forest where fully 400 young women were assembled. They were laughing and talking together as gaily as if they had gathered for a picnic instead of a war or conquest. They were divided into 4 companies, and Tip noticed that they were all dressed in costumes similar to that worn by the General Ginger. The only real difference was that while the girls from the Munchkin country had the blue strip in front of their skirts, those from the country of the Quadlings had the red strip in front, and those from the country of the Winkies had the yellow strip in front, and the Gillikin girls wore the purple strip in front. All had green waist representing the Emerald City they intended to conquer, and the top button of each waist indicated by its color which country the wearer came from. The uniforms were jaunty and becoming, and quite effective when massed together. Tip thought the strange army bore no weapons whatsoever, but in this he was wrong, for each girl had stuck through the knot of her back hair 2 long, glittering knitting needles. General Ginger immediately mounted the stump of a tree and addressed her army. "Friends, fellow citizens, and girls," she said, "we are about to begin our great revolt against the men of Oz. We march to conquer the Emerald City, to dethrone the Scarecrow King, to acquire thousands of gorgeous gems, to rifle the royal treasury, and to obtain power over our former oppressors. Hurrah! Said those who had listened, but Tip thought most of the army was too much engaged in chatting to pay attention to the words of the general. The command to march was now given, and the girls formed themselves into 4 bands or companies and set off with eager strides toward the Emerald City. The boy followed after them, carrying several baskets and wraps and packages which various members of the army of revolt had placed in his care. It was not long before they came to the green gates, the green granite walls of the city, and halted before the gateway. The guardian of the gate once came out and looked at them curiously, as if a circus had come to town. He carried a bunch of keys swung around his neck by a golden chain. His hands were thrust carelessly into his pockets, and he seemed to have no idea at all that the city was threatened by rebels. Speaking pleasantly to the girls, he said, "Good morning, my dears. What can I do for you?" "Surrender instantly," answered General Ginger, standing before him and frowning as terribly as her pretty face would allow her to do so. "Surrender?" echoed the man, astounded. "Why, it's impossible. It's against the law. I never heard of such a thing in my life." "Still, you must surrender," exclaimed the general fiercely. "We are revolting." "You don't look like it," said the guardian, gazing from one to another admiringly. "But we are," cried Ginger, stamping her foot impatiently. "And we mean to conquer the Emerald City." "Good gracious," returned the surprised guardian of the gates. "What a nonsensical idea. Go home to your mothers, my good girls, and milk the cows and bake the bread. Don't you know it's a dangerous thing to conquer a city?" "We are not afraid," responded the general, and she looked so determined that it made the guardian uneasy. So he rang the bell for the soldier with the green whiskers, and the next minute he was sorry he had done so, for immediately he was surrounded by a crowd of girls who drew the knitting needles from their hair and began jabbing them at the guardian with the sharp points, dangerously near his fat cheeks and blinking eyes. The poor man howled loudly for mercy and made no resistance when Ginger drew a bunch of keys from around his neck. Followed by her army, the general now rushed to the gateway, where she was confronted by the Royal Army of Oz, which was the other name for the soldier with the green whiskers. "Halt!" he cried, and pointed his long gun full in the face of the leader. Some of the girls screamed and ran back, but General Ginger bravely stood her ground and said reproachfully, "Why, how now? Would you shoot a poor defenseless girl?" "No," replied the soldier, "for my gun isn't loaded." "Not loaded?" "No, for fear of accidents. And I have forgotten where I hid the powder and shot I loaded it with. But if you'll wait a short time, I'll try to hunt them down." "Don't trouble yourself," said Ginger cheerfully. Then she turned to her army and cried, "Girls, the gun isn't loaded!" "Hooray!" shrieked the rebels, delighted at this good news, and they proceeded to rush upon the soldier with the green whiskers in such a crowd that it was a wonder why they didn't stick the knitting needles into one another. But the Royal Army of Oz was too much afraid of the women to meet the onslaught. He simply turned about and ran with all his might through the gate towards the royal palace, while General Ginger and her mob flocked into the unprotected city. In this way was the Emerald City captured without a drop of blood being spilled. The army of revolt had become the army of conquerors. It's JB. I gotta be quite honest, that was a ridiculous chapter. How's a bunch of defenseless girls with knitting needles overtake the city of Oz so easily? I guess it makes sense, but I thought for sure they were going to be like, "Yeah, no, you're not coming in." Alright, let's see where the end of this chapter is going to leave us, and we might go ahead and call it. I think this is chapter 8. The Scarecrow plans an escape. Tip slipped away from the girls and followed swiftly after the soldier with the green whiskers. The evading army entered the city more slowly, for they stopped to dig emeralds out of the walls and paving stones with the points of their knitting needles. So the soldiers and the boy reached the palace before the news had spread that the city was conquered. The Scarecrow and Jack Pumpkinhead were still playing quotes in the courtyard when the game was interrupted by the abrupt entrance of the Royal Army of Oz, who came flying in without his hat or gun, his clothes in sad disarray, and his long beard floating a yard behind him as he ran. "Tally one for me," said the Scarecrow calmly. "What's wrong, my man?" he added, addressing the soldier. "Oh, your Majesty, your Majesty, the city is conquered," gasped the Royal Army, who was all out of breath. "This is quite sudden," said the Scarecrow, "but please go and bar all the doors and windows of the palace, while I show this Pumpkinhead how to throw a quoit." The soldier hastened to do this, while Tip, who had arrived at his heels, remained in the courtyard to look at the Scarecrow with wondrous eyes. His Majesty continued to throw the quoits as coolly as if no danger threatened his throne. But the Pumpkinhead, having caught sight of Tip, ambled towards the boy as fast as his wooden legs would go. "Good afternoon, noble parent," he cried delightfully. "I am glad to see you are here. That terrible sawhorse ran away with me." "I suspected it," said Tip. "Did you get hurt? Are you cracked at all?" "No, I arrived safely," answered Jack, "and His Majesty has been very kind indeed to me." At this moment, the soldier with the green whiskers returned, and the Scarecrow asked, "By the way, who has conquered me?" "A regiment of girls gathered from the four corners of the land of Oz," replied the soldier, still pale with fear. "But where was my standing army at the time?" inquired His Majesty, looking at the soldier gravely. "Your standing army was running," answered the fellow honestly, "for no man could face the terrible weapons of the invaders." "Well," said the Scarecrow, after a moment's thought, "I don't mind much the loss of my throne, for it is a tiresome job to rule over the Emerald City, and this crown is so heavy that it makes my head ache. But I hope the conquerors have no intention of injuring me, just because I happen to be the king." "I heard them say," remarked Tip with some hesitation, "that they intend to make a rag carpet out of your insides and stuff a sofa cushion with your insides." "Ah, then I really am in danger," declared His Majesty positively, "and it will be wise for me to consider a means to escape." "Where can you go?" asked Jack Pumpkinhead. "Why, to my friend the Tin Woodman, who rules over the Winkies, and calls himself their emperor," was his answer. "I am sure he will protect me." Tip was looking out the window. "The palace is surrounded by the enemy," he said. "It is too late to escape. They would soon tear you to pieces." The Scarecrow sighed. "In an emergency," he announced, "it is always a good thing to pause and reflect. Please excuse me while I pause and reflect." "But we also are in danger," said the Pumpkinhead anxiously. "If any of these girls understanding cooking, my end is not far off." "Nonsense," exclaimed the Scarecrow. "They're too busy to cook, even if they knew how." "But should I remain here a prisoner for any length of time," protested Jack, "I'm liable to spoil." "Ah, then you would not be fit to associate with," returned the Scarecrow. "The matter is more serious than I suspected. You," said the Pumpkinhead gloomily, "are liable to live for many years. My life is necessarily short, for I must take advantage of the few days that remain to me." "There, there, don't worry," answered the Scarecrow soothingly. "If you'll keep quite long enough for me to think, I'll try to find some way for all of us to escape." So the others waited in patient silence while the Scarecrow walked to a corner and stood with his face to the wall for a good 5 minutes. At the end of that time, he faced them with a more cheerful expression on his painted face. "Where's the sawhorse you rode here?" he asked the Pumpkinhead. "Why, I said he was a jewel, and so your man locked him up in the royal treasury," said Jack. "That was the only place I could think of, your Majesty," added the soldier, fearing he had made a blunder. "It pleases me very much," said the Scarecrow. "Has the animal been fed?" "Oh, yes, I gave him a heaping peck of sawdust." "Excellent!" cried the Scarecrow. "Bring the horse here at once." The soldier hastened away, and presently they heard the clattering of the horse's wooden legs upon the pavement as he was led into the courtyard. His Majesty regarded the steed critically. "He doesn't seem especially graceful," he remarked musingly. "But I suppose he can run?" "He can indeed," said Tip, gazing upon the sawhorse admiringly. "Then, bearing us upon his back, he must make a dash through the ranks of the rebels and carry us to my friend the Tin Woodman," announced the Scarecrow. "He can't carry 4, objected Tip. "No, but he may be induced to carry 3, said His Majesty. "I shall therefore leave my royal army behind." for far from ease with which he was conquered, I have little confidence in his powers." "Still, he can run," declared Tip, laughing. "I expect this blow," said the soldier sulkingly, "but I can bear it. I shall disguise myself by cutting off my lovely green whiskers, and after all, it is no more dangerous to face those reckless girls than to ride this fiery, untamed wooden horse." "Perhaps you are right," observed his Majesty, "but for my part, not being a soldier, I am fond of danger. Now, my boy, you must mount first, and please sit as close to the horse's neck as possible." Tip climbed quickly into place, and the soldier and the Scarecrow managed to hoist the Pumpkinhead to a seat just behind him. There remained so little space for the king that he was liable to fall off just as soon as the horse started. "Fetch a clothesline," said the king to his army, "and tie us all together. Then, if one falls off, we all fall off." And while the soldier was gone for a clothesline, his Majesty continued, "It is well for me to be careful, for my very existence is in danger." "I have to be careful as you do," said Jack. "Not exactly," replied the Scarecrow, "for if everything happened to me, that would be the end of me. But if anything happened to you, they could use you for seed." The soldier now returned with a long line and tied all three firmly together, also lashing them to the body of the sawhorse, so there seemed to be little danger of their tumbling off. "Now, throw open the gates," commanded the Scarecrow, "and we'll make a dash to liberty or to death." The courtyard in which they were standing was located in the center of the great palace, which surrounded it on all sides. But in one place a passage led to an outer gateway, which the soldier had barred by order of his sovereign. It was through this gateway His Majesty proposed to escape, and the royal army now led the sawhorse along the passage and unbarred gate, which swung backward with a loud crash. "Now," said Tip to the horse, "you must save us all. Run as fast as you can for the gate of the city, and don't let anything stop you." "All right," replied the sawhorse gruffly, and dashed away so suddenly that Tip had to grasp for breath and hold firmly to the post he had driven into the creature's neck. Several of the girls who stood outside guarding the palace were knocked over by the sawhorse's mad dash. Others ran screaming out of the way. The only one or two jabbed their knitting needles frantically at the escaping prisoners. Tip got one small prick in his left arm, which smarted for an hour afterward. But the needles had no effect upon the Scarecrow or Jack Pumpkinhead, who never even suspected that they were being prodded. As for the sawhorse, he made a wonderful record, upsetting a fruit cart, overturning several meek-looking men, and finally bowling over a new guardian of the gate, a fussy little fat woman appointed by General Ginger. Nor did the impetuous charger stop then. Once outside the walls of the Emerald City, he dashed along the road to the west with fast and violent leaps that shook the breath out of the boy and filled the Scarecrow with wonder. Jack had ridden at this mad rate once before, so he devoted every effort to holding on with both hands, his Pumpkinhead upon its stick, enduring, meantime, a dreadful jolting with the courage of a philosopher. Slow him up, shouted the Scarecrow. "My straw is all shaking down into my legs." But Tip had no breath to speak, so the sawhorse continued his wild career, unchecked and with unbated speed. Presently they came to the banks of a wide river, and without a pause the wooden steed gave one final leap and launched them all in midair. A second later they were rolling, splashing, and bobbing about in the water, the horse struggling frantically to find rest for its feet, and its riders being first plunged beneath the rapid current and the floating upon the surface like corks. Well, that took a turn, didn't it? So right there was 9 chapters. Yep, I think that's a good spot to call it. Right in the midst of battle, all of them floating up in corks on the surface of the water. And we can start chapter 10 the Journey to the Tin Woodman and meet our next friend next week on Monday. I think that's what we'll do. Drastic turn indeed. What's up, RJ? I hope you're doing well, fam. It's really good to see you, man. I appreciate you being here. We just made it through our 9 chapters of The Marvelous Land of Oz, and it's putting us right on par for right around our 2-minute mark. And I'm really glad that y'all, Anna, thanks, talk to you later. Yeah, absolutely, Anna, I appreciate you being here, fam. I hope you sleep well, and we'll talk tomorrow. I'm doing alright, Kev. Just doing mail. That's something that I also need to get back onto. I've got a lot of little art cards to draw up, so. But Monday, I always take Monday off from editing and everything. Pokemon, that's my one reset day, save for a few streams that I'm in. And so this kind of aligns perfectly with that objective, so. Yeah, have a great night, Anna. Yeah, it's good to see you, man. I'm sorry I haven't been able to pop into any of your live streams. Weekends have proven a little difficult lately with all the wrestling events and whatnot, but I've been working super late during the week now, so it makes it a little bit hard, man. But just know every time I see you, if I'm not saying hi, I'm probably lurking. But you also know the attention it takes to say hi, and then everybody says hi, so I try to make my presence known enough and when it's needed, but just know I'm loving what you're doing, fam. And I've been meaning to get with you and ask you about your poetry and how that's going. The Foist 9 chapters. That's funny. Hey, Ernie, how's it going, fam? I hope you're doing well. You just missed it. Just missed it. We just finished up. And this one was a little bit tough tonight, I'm not gonna lie. Missed you and ALB live stream. I was there. I was working though, so I popped in for a second while I was on my little lunch break, Ernie, and then I had to get back to my attention at work. New one tonight, actually, and re-rolled. Was I waiting for hardcore members yesterday? Excellent. Watching on TV, awesome. Awesome. I can't wait to hear it, man, and I can't wait if I'm able to hear the other one. I'm not sure what membership I have. But yeah, I would love to hear the one that you recited. I also recited a poem on Saturday night. It was one that was written by our very own Raphilosophy. He sent me a poem and asked if I would read it live, and I did. And while we are thinking, I'm just going to take a real quick gander here. Because I know typically on Mondays I'm very firm on a like that raid mentality. I don't like to necessarily raid on Mondays because this should be our bedtime stream and whatnot, but at the same time I know I'm going to be going and finding a stream, and I know all of you will be going to find a stream, so why not raid on Monday? So let me just take a real quick gander here. I see Jay's Corner is live. Curious if Bro is still live. Alright, y'all. Well, we are going to wrap it up for the night. We are at about that 2-hour mark, just shy of. We got through our 9 chapters. But I super appreciate you guys showing up as always and hanging out with me on Monday, decompressing a little bit. Whether you stayed for the whole thing, popped in, used me in the background, ASMR. Just know that I appreciate you being here and supporting me and always believing in ghosts. So everybody, go and get everything that you set out to get today. Don't let anything stop you. but it takes $0 to be a good person, y'all. And I will see you next week on Monday. This is who I see is on at the moment. And this is our good friend, of course, Bro Rips. Yeah, of course. So we can go and head on over to Bro Rips. That's where I'm going to be going back to and hanging out a little bit for the night. But I hope you all have a beautiful rest of your night. And I will see you all next time. Yes, you as well, JB. I appreciate you being here, fam. Thank you. Thank you all. Have a beautiful rest of your night, y'all.